Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, Wendigo, the Encounter. So I don't really know how to start this, so I'm just gonna spew out some stuff and hope it all makes sense, because it sure as hell doesn't to me. Have any of you even encountered one before? If not, let me tell, these things are not like how Google or any of pictures you find depicts them, at least not right away. Let's get into it. I'm from Canada, and I live on a reserve that's about 30 minutes from any town, relatively close compared to other places I've been. Well, it's the end of December, and just getting finished with holidays, and spending it relatively alone, thanks COVID. I get a call from one of my friends. He wants to go hunting. Well, that's kind of a problem, because I've never shot a gun or went hunting before. Pretty pathetic for a Native American, if you ask me. But anyways, he tells me he just needs my eyes and another set of legs to help carry whatever he catches. So I agree, making one of the biggest mistakes I would come to regret. So he picks me up in his crappy old Ford truck he uses for hunting, tells me we are going deep into the bush, and we'll find a spot to camp along the way. So we drive about 20 minutes into the woods, following what little road is left, and we get to a point where we have to continue on foot. We unload our gear and supplies, and carry it till we find a nice clearing with room for everything. After we set up camp, we begin our trek into the woods, going farther than I had gone before. Saw a couple of bucks and rabbits, nothing too spectacular. So we keep looking, because he wants the big daddy buck, and we come to this other clearing much larger than the one we are camping at, and something about this part of the woods just feels off. It had a heavy feeling, to like the air was thick, and just a disorienting aura about this place. But we hadn't caught anything yet, and we're getting hungry, so we spot a rabbit in the middle of this clearing. Buddy lines up the shot, and bam, we have dinner. So being the one without the gun, I go to get our little dinner in the middle of this clearing, and I notice something odd, that it's a perfect circle. No tree stumps, no sign that any human had made this gigantic circle. I also happened to notice what looked like claw marks on the trees surrounding the area. Buddy said it's from bears sharpening claws and marking territory, but the marks were so deep into the trees it seemed off. Anyways, it's dark out now, and we are back at our campsite eating and talking about how crazy this pandemic shit is. I also brought up the clearing we were at and how weird it felt to me. I wanted to know if he felt like that too, or if I was just exaggerating. My anxiety makes me do that sometimes. To which he said, yeah, he noticed the change in the air too, and said it made him feel dizzy and worn out, but he also said it just could have been from the long day we had. So on that note, it was time for bed. We both slept in same tent. It's the middle of winter, and bundling up can only do so much, plus he was like a brother to me. It had to be around 1 a.m. when we both woke up to sound of the most horrible scream I'd ever heard. What that fuck was that? Was my first though. I'm guessing my friend was thinking the thing as he looked at me with fear on his face. I know, because I was afraid too. So he grabs his gun, loads a round into the thing, and we just sit there for a while and listen. Now I know my friend is at least safe, he's got a gun, but I have nothing. Fear and my anxiety start getting the better of me, so I ask, where's the hatchet we used to split wood? Out there by the fire. He said, so I tell him I'm gonna open the tent, grab the hatchet, and when I jump in you seal the thing back up. I open the tent, and as fast as I can bolt to grab that hatchet. As I go to turn around with hatchet in hand, I'm quickly greeted by my friend shoving me down by the back of my neck. He put his finger up to his mouth to tell me to be quiet, and we listen. In the distance, I can hear the slow sound of crunching snow and a faint, high-pitched guttural growl. Now I'm in full panic mode. We don't even have to say anything to each, cause we both know our hunting trip was over, and it was time to leave. All we had to do was make it to the truck. In the dead of night. It sounded so easy. But it wasn't, and I knew it from the moment I heard, I'm gonna fire a warning shot. Before I could even open my mouth to tell him no, it was too late. The shot rang in the distance, and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard a scream so soul-piercing it felt like it lasted forever. It definitely echoed and lingered much more than this gunshot did. It was petrifying. I'd never heard such a haunting scream before, that I was literally frozen in fear. Then we could hear whatever made this scream was charging right for us, with the sound of crunching snow getting closer and closer. We looked at each other and just ran in the direction of the truck, frantically sprinting, calling out to each other to make sure the other hadn't fallen behind. "We're almost there," we kept telling each other as we are weaving through trees, making a beeline to the truck, trying to ignore the sound of this growl that sounds like it's right in my ear. "But I can see the truck. We're gonna make it. We're getting out of here." As we come up to the truck, my friend makes it to his side and unlocks both passenger and driver side at the same time. As I open the door, he does too at the same time, and then he's gone in a flash of white. This thing had gotten him. Ran at him with such force that when it tackled him, it shook the truck side to side. I stood there in shock. I call out to him, but all I can hear are screams and a couple gunshots, and then dead silence again. I know in my heart that my friend is dead, and so am I if I don't get the fuck out of here. I go over to the driver's side and find the keys on the ground. He must have let them go when he got tackled. I hop and start the damn thing, whip it around in the direction I need to get out of here. Then I saw it. Skin as white as snow, completely hairless. Eyes that had sunken into its head made dark circles around eyes that were just as white as its skin. No nose, teeth so jagged and sharp shined with the color of blood, and its lips looked like they had been chewed off, so all you're staring at is teeth. Its body was so disproportioned, long, lanky limbs. This thing is blocking me from leaving, but I'm getting out of here no matter what. I floor it with the tires spinning. I shoot forward, and so does it, screaming that blood-curdling scream as it charges at me. Now I'm getting up close and personal as this thing lunges at the truck and bounces off the hood and over top of the truck. As I'm speeding away, I glance at the rear view mirror and witness this thing get up and just stand there watching me drive off with its head tilted slightly. I knew I had just escaped death with the price of losing my friend. Second story: an extreme haunted house. The first horror film I ever watched was An American Werewolf in London. I remember the transformation scene vividly, and unlike my older cousin who was traumatized by it, I loved it, and it got me hooked on the genre. I eat up everything horror and do everything short of buying the Funkos, which in my opinion is a waste of money. Back when streaming wasn't a thing, I collected an entire wall full of DVDs dedicated to horror films, from classics to foreign to cheese. I couldn't get enough of being scared. I read that horror stimulates the primitive part of our brain that is hardly ever activated in modern times. Unlike our ancestors, we are on the top of the food chain and rarely have to worry about being eaten by saber-toothed tigers or being wiped out from the flu. Because of this, horror films, video games, and even things like roller coasters are used vicariously, so we experience the fear of nearly dying, but not actually being in any real danger. Haunted houses are a prime example of this. Every year during the Halloween season, these places become extremely competitive with each other, all trying to be scarier than the others. The problem is that people are sort of desensitized from horror, and it's not just from movies or television, but from the nightly news and social media feeds. Mass shootings, patricide, abduction, natural disasters, and so much more. However, for fans of extreme horror, this is a blessing. For people like me, we live for this kind of stuff and will go out of their way to find ones that only allow you to enter if you sign a waiver. Over the years, I found a few like-minded people online and became real-life friends with them. We have a group chat where we share movie and book recommendations. We called ourselves the Gorehounds. While we were always communicating, it was during the Halloween season that we would share the scariest haunted houses to visit. Most of the extreme, haunted houses were not advertised to the public. Most of them were illegally set up to make it feel more dangerous, and the really good ones were set up in places that were already creepy and riddled with a sordid past. A hotel where a fire killed dozens of people, a warehouse where a serial killer tortured the homeless, etc. This year, a member of the group told us about a new place. A place that she claimed would be crowned the best of the haunted houses, Goose Creek Sanitarium. After a quick search online, I found that Goose Creek Sanitarium had a dark history. It was abandoned in the late 70s due to a fire, and since then it just sat there, gathering dust and mold. The most recent thing I could find on it was a short article from a small newspaper that said it had been recently purchased. Other than that, there was nothing. The drive there took a few hours, but we've driven more than that over the years in our search for the scariest place. Unfortunately, there was little to see on the way there, so most of the drive I slept. When I woke up, it was nearly dark, and the car was rocking on a dirt road that hasn't been maintained for decades. The trees that hugged the road and covered the sky like skeletal fingers looked perfect for a scary movie. Goose Creek Sanitarium was a large 5-story building that saw no upkeep in decades. Surrounding it was a black iron fence to keep its patients from getting away. Very little had to be done to make the place spookier. The people who put it up knew this and didn't want to ruin it with many decorations. To me, this made sense. After all, a little salt goes a long way when cooking, and too much will spoil the meal. The same is true with decorating a place that is already creepy. The line to get in only had a few people in it. Like us, they were horror connoisseurs. We knew some of them from other extreme haunted houses we visited over the years, and this time we invited some of them to be members in our group chat. Like those other places, we had to sign a waiver. This allowed the workers to grab us, pull hair, and more. Getting into the main building required us to walk through a garden that was overgrown with weeds and littered with broken statues of angels that were covered with moss from years of neglect. Like the rest of the place, not much had to be done in order to make it creepy. Before entering the building, one of the workers grabbed Renee, one of the founding members of the Gore Hounds, and ran off with her on his shoulders. This caused everyone to laugh, including Renee, as she was being taken further away. "Bring her back when you're done with her," Aaron, Renee's boyfriend, called out while laughing. At the entrance to the building was a so-called tour guide who was dressed like a ghoul who just crawled out of a grave. A man wearing a jacket and shorts asked why an extreme haunted house would need a tour guide, but the guide just smiled and said that everything would be explained later in the tour. He explained the history of the place as he led us through each of the rooms. Most of the rooms didn't have anyone jump out and grab us because they didn't require any. The history of the building was terrifying, so it did not need to resort to embellishment. Not only were the mentally ill treated like animals here, but Goose Creek Sanitarium also housed people with tuberculosis, and they were equally mistreated. Whenever someone died, they were brought to the basement's crematorium by being dropped down a dumbwaiter made for corpses. According to the guide, the smokestacks that were connected to the crematorium in the basement would have to be cleaned out every month because the remains would stick to the wall. That job was given to one of the other inmates because of how damaging it was to people's lungs. If someone died while doing it, they would simply be added to the chimney's ashes. While others in the group thought the story was bullshit, I believed every word of it because of the horrible things I discovered online about the place. After this introduction, we headed to the cells. As soon as we left the lobby, iron bars in the doorway dropped, preventing us from leaving that way. The sound of the heavy metallic clang was deafening and caused us all to nearly shit ourselves. The guide chuckled. When Goose Creek Sanitarium was first constructed, the biggest fear was that someone would escape. That is why there are bars in each of the doorways and windows. That wasn't in anything I read while doing my research on the place. but it sort of made sense. After all, this place used to house the worst criminals and lunatics the state had to offer. In the cells, people were reaching out to us on both sides of the hallway, moaning and screaming. Some pulled us towards them, and we would do our best to avoid their hands, or just slap them away. While this was going on, the guide told us about some of the famous murderers who once lived there. The most famous of them was Solomon Gideon, who killed 13 people in a 2-day span. He called Goose Creek Sanitarium home for 10 years before the mysterious fire that caused the place to close down allowed him to escape. Where he went is still a mystery. I could talk for days about Solomon Gideon, but that's a story for another day. While being told all of this, a man wearing a dirty surgical mask came out of one of the hallways, grabbed someone I didn't get the name of by the hair, and dragged him away. The man being dragged away tried to fight him off, but the masked man not only had the element of surprise, but was also very physically imposing. Because of this, no one stepped in to help. All we did was look on helplessly. We all signed up for this. As we left the cells, more bars fell, preventing us from leaving the way we came. Deeper into the bowels of the sanitarium, we came across what I assumed used to be the mess hall. When we walked in, it seemed to me that the inmates had taken control of the asylum. Hanging from the ceiling was wet meat hanging from hooks and cages. Inside the cages were people begging for our help. The guide spoke over their cries and told us more about the history of the place. How the doctors were known to perform experimental surgeries and procedures. When someone in the group asked if they meant frontal lobotomies, the guide smiled and said while those did happen in Goose Creek Sanitarium, there were far worse fates. Rooms were constructed with the sole purpose of driving insane men sane. The idea was that if something could make a sane man insane, it could have the opposite effect. This included flashing lights, prolonged darkness, sensory deprivation, being wet, cold, hot. The people who had to endure this were even starved, the guide said as we left. Again, more bars fell down, preventing our escape, and I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared by this. Our next stop was one of the operation rooms where blood was splattered around, making the place look and smell more like a charnel house than a hospital. I didn't think much of this. After all, it isn't uncommon for extreme haunted houses to use ground beef and the blood that comes with it as decoration. The guide told us to look around and that we would meet back up at surgery room 3 in 30 minutes. We stayed in small groups and wandered around a little, all the while having our hair and clothes pulled by people wanting to be freed. Their makeup is Hollywood level, Andrew said, pointing out someone who looked to have been a captive for weeks. She was so thin that I assumed that she was a recovering drug addict or a method actor, and her dirty white dress highlighted the fact that she was as pale as a ghost. The more we explored, the less we saw the other groups that were with us. Occasionally we heard screaming, but we couldn't be certain that it came from them, or the actors locked away in their cells, or tied to steel gurneys. After 20 or so minutes went by, I noticed that the guide was nowhere in sight. I was concerned about this, but the rest of the people in my group assumed it was just part of the show. He abandoned us so we would have to escape on our own, Aaron said as he started making his way back the way we came, forgetting about the iron bars. Making our way back to where we last saw the guide, we looked for an escape route. At the time we were relieved. After all, up to this point, it wasn't overly scary. Now that we were left to find our own way out, we felt that it was about to get good. We spread out to look for a way out, but kept close enough to each other so we could hear if one of us called out. After a while, I came across a dark hallway that had 6 different directions to go, including the way I came from. Calling out to the rest of the gore hounds, we met in the grand intersection of hallways. Some of us wondered why the hallway was designed like that, but Andrew was quick to scout ahead to find a way out. Before he could open the door at the end of the hallway, he chose at random. One of the women from the other group barreled past that door and ran by us. She didn't even try to stop or to explain herself, and the look on her face was pure horror. Under usual circumstances, we would have followed her just as quickly, but we came here to get scared, so we went in the direction she came from. After all, we had to know what made her freak out like that. We couldn't see much in that dark room, but there was an echo and the floor was sticky. Somewhere close was the sound of shallow gasps. We had to feel around to navigate our way through. On the way, we got separated. Made worse when some of the actors came into the room with night vision goggles and took some of our hands as if they were in our group and led us away from the others and the exit. By the time the few of us discovered that half of the gorehounds were no longer with the rest, we were in the next room, a surgery room made to host an audience. The smell of fresh blood was unmistakable. In the middle of the room was the body of one of the people in the other group. She was tied to the operating table, and the surgeon who appeared earlier in the cells was standing over her. Some of us freaked out when we saw this, but Debbie assured us that it was all part of the show, that we were looking at a dummy, and the person we met in line was a plant to make the experience feel real. As she said this, I inwardly applauded. We all had experienced extreme horror houses before, but we never came across anything like that before. In the distance, there was the sound of someone yelling orders in a bullhorn. "Stay where you are, don't come any closer," and more. There were even a few gunshots. We all froze, wondering if this was part of the show too. If it was, it didn't fit the rest of the experience. The surgeon aimed his scalpel at us and warned us not to move before running out the door towards the shooting. Naturally, I didn't listen and went to look out into the hallway. I thought this was all just part of the show. However, when the surgeon started stabbing the officers before getting gunned down, I knew it was real. After the raid and the police took everyone's statements, we were let go. They promised to do all they could to find Renee and the others that went missing, but after 2 years, we don't have much hope in finding them alive. In the days that followed, details of what happened emerged. In the 10 days the haunted house was up, 36 people went missing and at least 14 were murdered. The man responsible for the haunted house was best friends with a shady prison warden. The two of them had a deal that the warden would supply prisoners to make the horror experience authentic for an unspecified amount of cash. Those acquired from the prison included 8 murderers and 10 violent offenders. The worst of it, though, was a known cult leader who would dine on the blood of his sacrifices and must have recruited the others. Why this person ever saw the light of day is a mystery to me. 7 of these people were killed in the raid. The rest are among the missing, including the man who paid off that warden. Aaron killed himself a few weeks after that night. I think he blamed himself for laughing as they took Renee. The Gorehounds broke up soon after that. Nothing officially. It's just that we no longer update each other on horror movies or other haunted houses. I sort of talk to Debbie, but never about anything horror-related. Most of the time when we hang out, we silently fish and or drink. I can't speak for the others, but I cannot bring myself to watch horror anymore and got rid of my horror collection. Third story. I bought a haunted television. I'm something of a collector. If it's strange, if it's cursed, if it's twisted, haunted, or tinged with the supernatural in any way, then I want it. I've been actively collecting for a few years now, so my house plays host to all sorts of unique artifacts. I've got everything from a book that drives readers insane, haven't got around to reading it yet, to a Dybbuk box, a real one, I swear, to a unicorn skull, bigger than you'd think. So many treasures to study and admire. But my recent favorite by far is the television. It was my friend Liza who sold the television to me, though she tried to talk me out of it. It wasn't even what I was originally there for. See, Liza's a collector and seller of obscure antiques and rare items, and in her work it's not uncommon for her to stumble on something right up my alley. Sometimes she saves these things for the Velvet Room auctions, but sometimes she'll save one special for me and ring me up to have a look. That Friday morning a few weeks ago, she left me a message about coming to see a vintage book of spells supposedly kept by Jack Parsons. I already have an entire bookcase of just spell books, but given that Parsons was an occultist of notoriety, I was intrigued by it for its historical significance. So I threw on some clothes, told the dog to keep an eye out while I was gone, and drove on over to Liza's. An hour later my truck was parked outside her unreasonably large house, the sort of Victorian Gothic monstrosity out in the countryside that you'd expect an antique collector to go gaga for. She opened the front door before I'd even made it to the porch steps and ushered me in with a bright smile. Her brown hair was done up in soft curls, and she wore the same ruby-red lipstick and midnight eyeliner that she always did to age up her baby-faced features a bit and look her 30 years. She says it helps clients take her more seriously. We hugged, caught up a bit. As usual, she had tea and cookies ready for me in her sitting room. We chatted and sipped on a vintage Narcissus, surrounded by Liza's numerous odds and ends, our conversation punctuated by the ticks of her 3 grandfather clocks. After catching up, Liza sent me to wash my hands and had the book waiting for me when I returned. I began inspecting it, taking mental notes of the quality of preservation and the added value of Parsons' handwritten notes in the margins. "So where'd you find this gem, Liz?" I asked as I thumbed through it. "Oh, I bought it off a collector upstate," she said. "It came in a bundle with a few other things. I really only wanted the seance table, but the seller insisted that it was to be sold with the other items." "Why? Is it all part of a set?" "Certainly not. None of it relates to each other at all. But the collector's in the process of selling his entire collection, and he's made it clear he's in a rush to do so. I get the sense he's selling in bundles just to get rid of things as quickly as possible." I looked up from the spell book, surprised. "He's selling his whole collection? That's pretty extreme. Is he moving out of the country or something?" Liza grinned wryly. "Well, he's a believer in the supernatural, like you. From what I gleaned in conversation, he got his hands on a few items that spooked him silly, and now he wants nothing to do with any of it." A little thrill ran through me. An item that could scare a man so badly he'd sell off his whole collection, no doubt years upon years worth of work, had to be something juicy. Were any of those spooky items included in the bundle you bought, by chance? I asked Liza, looking around. There was one included that he was complaining about. I put it here somewhere. There. Liza walked across the sitting room, heels clacking on the floor. Nestled between the aforementioned seance board and a potted Norfolk pine was a squat object draped in a sheet. Liza pulled the sheet off to reveal the television. It was an old, black, boxy model, the kind you might have had in the early 90s, and small enough to comfortably carry. "A TV?" I asked. "Really? That scared him?" Liza laughed. "I had to do a bit of prying to get it out of him, but he claimed he could hear demons through it, or something like that, and insisted it can't be left on for long." Immagine. Voices from the other side reaching out through the TV. A quintessentially modern ghost tale. "I think the poor guy got carried away with some whiskey while flicking through channels, is all." "So you don't believe him?" "I don't." Liza shot me an amused look. "But I'm guessing you do. Let's just say I'm curious. Curious enough that I'll buy it along with this," I said, closing the spell book. 5,000 for the book, and I'll throw in 1,000 for the TV. Liza's eyes went wide. "AC, darling, I can't let you do that. The book? Sure, but the TV is junk." Believe me, I've had it sitting here a week and I haven't heard any demonic voices. I was going to take it to the dump tomorrow. Nevertheless, I want it. It's a waste of space. It barely even turns on. Still want it. For goodness sake, you ridiculous creature. If you really want the damn thing, at least let me give it to you free, Liza said, exasperated. I can't have you blowing $1,000 for nothing on my conscience. And if this is the real deal, I can't have cheating you out of its value on my conscience. I carefully set the book down on the table and pulled my checkbook out of my pocket. I ignored Liza's continued protests and wrote out a check for $6,000. Say whatever you want, Liz, but my mind's made up. This baby's coming home with me. Midge. I called out to my dog as I hauled the TV through the front door, with Parsons' wrapped book on top of it. I slammed the door shut behind me with my foot and called again. Midge, come down. Seconds later, I heard the staccato beats of Midge's paws bounding down the stairs as she ran to greet me. Midge is a mutt, mid-sized with soft yellow fur and the cutest curlicue tail you ever saw. That's not why I picked her out at the pound, though. What really makes Midge special is her left eye, milky white and blind. Over the last 2 years, it's served me as wonderfully as I hoped. It sees things before I do. Good girl, Midgie. I cooed down at her, carrying the TV into my study. She trotted by my side with her tail wagging. I got us something real neat from Liza today, and I'd like you to help me take a look if you don't mind. I set the TV down on my desk, sweeping aside old papers and journals. I put the new spell book with the rest in the library, then came back and plugged in the TV, feeling ready to burst with giddiness. The TV crackled to life, its thick glass screen filling with gray static. I turned the volume up high and stared at that little square of static with anticipation, and stared, and stared, and stared some more. It briefly occurred to me that I may indeed have just blown $1,000. Midge was behind me, idly sniffing around at some taxidermied specimens I had behind the study door. Midge. Seat Mia. I called her over, impatient. She hurried over and licked my palm. I crouched down next to her, scratching behind her ear as I pointed up at the TV. See anything? Midge's gaze followed my direction, her good eye and blind eye both fixed on the screen. A few seconds passed without her reacting. She blinked her good eye. Then she went dead still. She continued staring up at the screen, her lips curling up to bare her teeth as she let loose a low, ragged growl. The TV speakers sparked and fizzed, prompting her to growl louder. Her ears went back and she barked viciously up at the TV. I burst into a smile and scratched behind her ear again. I grabbed her a treat from the bag on my desk and gave it to her. Good girl, Midge. Very, very good girl. Now run on upstairs. Midge, protective though she may be, was only too happy to obey that command. She zoomed out of the study so fast you'd think she was the Flash. I stood up and grinned at the TV with a little wave. Howdy. Nothing but static. There's no use hiding. I leaned in closer. I know you're in there. How's about a little chat? Static. I heard you're the talkative type, so go on. Talk. I'd be very interested in what you have to say. I grabbed a nearby notebook and pen. Static. All right. Have it your way. You'll want to talk eventually. I shrugged with a sigh and turned to leave the room. I glanced back at it over my shoulder just before walking out. If there's anything you and I have in common, it's that we've both got all the time in the world. I left the study door open and the TV on the rest of the day, waiting for whatever was in there to reach out. All throughout the house, I could hear the faint crackle of static as I went about doing chores and working on projects. Midge didn't venture downstairs once. The sun went down. Once darkness fell in and around the house, I finally heard it. A single, raspy hello from the study. I grabbed my notebook and pen and ambled over, triumphant. I walked into the study and shut the door behind me. The study light was off, so the only light in the room came in the form of the TV's cold, blue-tinged glow. The air swelled with the relentless fizz of static. I stepped closer, squinting into the senseless visual noise that continued to play within the cramped confines of the TV screen. After a moment of staring, I saw a faint shape hidden in the static. The barest outlines of a head, a nose, a mouth. Ready to chat? I asked it. My own voice sounded alien among the sound of static. The head tilted. Who are you? Its voice sounded borderline feminine, yet hollow and discordant, like corrupted audio. Just a friendly collector and inquirer, I said, flipping the notebook open to scribble notes and observations. I would never be stupid enough to give this thing my name. The better question is, who are you? A demon? A ghost? The voice hesitated before answering. I'm a movie star. I paused in my writing. Pardon? I was in the movies, it said faintly, then with more conviction. Yes, I was in the movies. With all the power of 1,000,000 eyes on me. That is indeed a lot of power. But I need a more specific detail to buy that claim. Like your name. It twitched. I don't remember. What a shame. What do you remember, then? I remember the table. The 5-pointed star carved into it, to mirror the black sun. I remember the blood-tempered blade. I remember the television on and hooked to the camera, so I could catch the moment forever. I remember I wanted more. More of what? More of everything, of course. More roles in more films, better ones, more exposure. My name on more tongues and my eyes in more dreams, more knowledge. To know and be known is power. Re-IGHT. Think I'm getting the picture here. I grinned and tapped my pen against my chin, toying with forces you thought you could control, fumbling the ritual. You wouldn't be the first. So what sacrifice did you try to get away with half-assing? The face contorted briefly into something hideous, its features screwing tightly toward the center before it smoothed itself back into neutrality. I was arrogant as you are once. I was foolish and small. Before I was in here. Where exactly is in here? I tapped the screen glass. The figure within recoiled. Come inside and see, it whispered. I chuckled and shook my head. That's no answer. How about hell? Is it hell? Hell is many places. Hell is far away and all around and very close. The mouth opened wide into a silent scream. The earth is just one small pocket. One pocket with its own rules. Those mewling writings of the Bible's hell are children's fairy tales beside what truly lies just beside your world. In some worlds all is flesh. In some, nothing is. In some, you breathe the dark in your lungs like water, always drowning but never dying. In some, you are the blood-raw fruit growing along the branch, hanging precariously by a vein, miles and miles high, waiting to be plucked. There are worlds of watching shadows and blinking eyes, worlds I cannot make you understand with mere words. They are pressing against the soft boundaries of yours, gnawing gently at the skin. You were frightened. Not at all. I continued writing down her words. I see it through the glass. Your heart is beating faster. The other I told was frightened too. So frightened he screamed himself hoarse by the 10th night. But you don't need to be frightened. Once you get used to the pain, it is beautiful. I'm not too proud to admit that something about the way it spoke unnerved me. Speaking to a spirit, or whatever this former human was now. I expected wrath, confusion, threats, incomprehensible wails. Yet the calm with which it spoke as it described all this felt out of place. Sincere. I can show you. I can show it all to you. I'd like to see. I glanced down at the TV controls. Do I have to switch channels or something? Come inside and see, it said. Or else I must come out to show you. Yeah, nice try, I snorted. How about you just show me from over there? I have told you your two choices. Hard pass on both. Let me show you. I want to show you. Then find another way. There is no other way. There is no easy way, it breathed. It is the lesson I have learned well. Nothing is given without something taken. But I swear to you, the sacrifice is always worth it. The pain is exquisite. I'll take your word for it. Look, if you won't show me anything from this other world, let's circle back to your life. How'd you get mixed up in occultism? When you got locked in during the ritual, did anything from the other side escape? Static. Oh, so we're back to the silent treatment? The mouth closed. Fine by me. Like I said earlier, we've got plenty of time. You just let me know when you feel like talking again. I snapped my notebook shut with a yawn and slipped it onto the desk beside the television. Been a long day. I for one am heading to bed. I'll swing back around in the morning to check up on you. Good night. I left the television on, the volume up, and the door open, in case it wanted or needed to call to me in the middle of the night. I then went upstairs to bed, the sound of static growing quieter behind me. At around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of Midge's low growls. I sat up groggily, barely out of the daze of sleep. Midge was on the foot of the bed with her back to me. Her hackles were raised and her ears pinned back as she growled at the open doorway. I rubbed my eyes and looked ahead. As far as I could see, there was only the darkness of the hallway wall. But there was also the sound of static, just a little louder than before. I went still. Midge's growls grew louder as she glared at the doorway. So too did the static. Then a little louder, and a little louder. A blue glow, so faint I very nearly couldn't see it, shined out of sight down the end of the hall, where the stairs would be. As the static continued to grow louder, the blue glow continued to grow brighter, and Midge's growling grew desperate and more frantic, her entire body trembling. Louder, brighter, louder, brighter, louder, brighter. And then it was standing in the doorway. I froze in place, my stomach lurching as I stared at what had escaped the TV. I trembled as badly as Midge. It was a faint, ever-shifting shape, all draped in static. There were the barest outlines of a head, a nose, a mouth. All else was impossible to describe. Anywhere my eyes settled on it, the image grew blurry and discombobulated. There was a constant visual flux that gave me the sense that it was not the thing before me that failed to be seen, but my own primitive eyes that could not process the sight. It moved closer until it was inches from the foot of the bed. Behind it, flat blots of static writhed on the floor. Let me show you, it breathed. I want to show you. I snapped out of it then. I grabbed Midge and bolted out of bed as the thing lurched forward onto the bed, running around it into the hall. The hallway and stairs were peppered with those strange blots, and I did my best to avoid them as I ran downstairs to the front door. I threw it open and practically chucked Midge out. I swung it shut and locked myself in before she could dart back in after me. Truck! I yelled at her through the door. She whined for a second, but made for the truck bed when I repeated the command. By that time, a blue glow was already casting my shadow on the door. The thing from the TV dragged itself down the stairs toward me, looking as though every step it took was excruciatingly painful. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a boot from the shoe rack, and hurled it at the thing as hard as I could, hoping to throw it off balance. Instead, the boot sailed clean through the thing's center, disappearing into the static. Excellent, that did nothing. I cursed under my breath and dashed to the living room with my hunter in close pursuit. The static blots were everywhere there, pulsating. The sound was deafening, unbearable, a ceaseless crescendo of noise. The only thing I could think to do was get to the TV in the study. I had a wild hope that if I altered it somehow, whether that meant fiddling with the controls or unplugging it, that might be enough to sever whatever access the being had to this world. But those goddamn fucking blots. I had to weave and hop and hug the wall just to avoid them, slowing me down and making me easier prey for the thing that followed. I could hear its hollow breathing just behind me. My lungs heaved and my heart thundered as leaped over blot after blot, until finally I was at the threshold of the study. On the desk, the TV glowed blank and blue, but it seemed I was too slow. Before I could even step through the door frame, something came down on my left shoulder and held me in place. I turned my head instinctively to look and saw buzzing static where my shoulder should have been. An unspeakable cold washed over my arm, worse than if I'd sunk it bare into snow. I felt myself turned around to face a head, a nose, a mouth. It leaned in close enough to block out the sight of anything else. My eyes ached from trying to see it. Let me show you. It shifted to hold my head in place. With my right hand, I grabbed the door frame. I thought maybe I could use it as leverage to pull myself out of the thing's grip, but even as I tensed to tighten my grip, the thing was already leaning in closer, until the world went dark and the cold washed over my head. And it was an unspeakable cold, the kind of cold born from nothingness, the kind of cold that occurs when all the atoms of the universe hang still in suspension, the void of interstitial space. And, pulsing in the pockets of infinity, there were worlds. My eyes did not fail me now. I could see impossibly far into whichever one I liked. As promised, I saw the lands of flesh, planet-sized organisms that writhed in the smoldering heat of black stars. I saw the dead worlds, flat and barren lands that stretched on forever into the dark. I saw the black, viscous oceans. I saw the living bodies that grew upon behemoth trees, agony-struck eyes staring up as they waited second by excruciating second. I saw the deep dreams and the uncoiling memories of the dead. I saw alien empires of gods. I saw you, as you will be, as you could be, as you shouldn't be. I was torn apart, and fused back together, and torn, and fused, on and on as my body screamed, and as I looked at it all. Everything that was mystery, that was forbidden, that was deranged and profane and indecipherable and bloody-born and backward. Everything that was terrifying and exquisite was right there for me to see at my leisure. I could have stayed there forever, but I could still feel my hand gripping the doorframe. I tightened my grip on it, used it to pull myself backward, and I was back in the study, face to face with the creature. I was sick to my stomach, my head reeling from the intense cold and the visions, but I had just barely enough presence of mind to move. I turned and lunged for the TV, the thing behind me lurching to grab me again. I grabbed the TV with what little strength I still had and held it in front of me like a shield as the thing threw itself at me with a faint scream. The scream was muffled as the thing collided with the TV screen, halfway inside the TV. Catching on, I thrust the television further over the entity, forcing it back inside. I had to throw my entire body weight over the back of the TV to first fully engulf the entity, then to keep it trapped inside, holding the TV screen down on the study floor. The thing continued to scream and rage inside as I extended my leg and hooked my ankle around the television cord. I then yanked it from the outlet. The noise stopped. The TV went still. All was quiet and dark in my house again. Asterisk. So, lesson learned, I will not leave the television on overnight again. The blots that my otherworldly visitor trailed throughout the house are gone, though they left black spots on my carpet that will have to be steam cleaned out. Midge remains so freaked by the experience that she still won't even go near my regular TV. As for the haunted one, it still turns on and still shows static, though I have not seen the entity that inhabited it since that first night. Whether it's purposely hiding itself or it's lost in some other world, I can only guess. I've been researching who it might have been when it was human. No leads so far. But despite everything, I count this as a win. I'm sure that with a little repair and experimentation, I'll be able to use that TV to see into those other worlds from a safe distance. I can't wait to see it all again. Once you get used to the pain, it is beautiful. Fourth story. Whistler or Wendigo in Georgia. Asterisk first post ever on Reddit. Been holding on to this story for a while, and after finding this sub, I felt you guys would be interested or have some input on what I could have seen. It's been almost 2 years, and I still can't get it out of my head. That whistle. Growing up in the mountains of North Georgia, camping and hiking were things me and my brother did so often it was second nature. So anytime Ryan and I had a break from school, we would head straight for the woods. We packed our gear, let our parents know where we were going, and that was that. No questions asked. We decided to camp about midways through Jack's River Trail in the Cayuga Wilderness, and it's a trail we knew fairly well as we had used to a few times before to practice long hikes. We arrived at the trailhead around lunchtime, parked the car, got our gear out, and headed into the woods. We passed a few hikers as moved along and asked them how the trail looked, and the answer was always the same: wet. Jack's River Trail probably crossed the river 50 times as it went along its 17-mile-plus journey, and with the colder temperatures of late fall settling in, it was harder for the trail to stay dry. We moved deeper into the trail and started to look for a place to make camp. This is where Ryan and I made our first mistake. You see, Ryan and I have this rule. We don't camp near people if at all possible. Call us paranoid, but the last thing we want is for someone to drag us out of our tents and into the woods never to be seen again. So we always camped a pretty decent ways off of the trail and in the area that wasn't popular with overnight camping. Roughly 2.5 hours or so, we found what we thought was the perfect place to set up for the 2 nights that we would be out. We came up to Horseshoe Bend and ventured about half a mile off the trail into a clearing and set up. We built a teepee fire lay for that night and pitched our tents on either side. After setting up and unloading, we decided to walk back to the trail and go exploring around some of many swimming holes Jack's River had to offer. This was during Thanksgiving break, and I remember being surprised at how few people were on the trail. Maybe it was the weather or the fact that this was early in the week, but there didn't seem to be anyone hiking, much less staying the night. Around 5 o'clock, Ryan and I headed back to camp to start our fire, make dinner, and settle in for the night. As soon as the sun began to set, the cold rushed in. We added more wood to the fire, sat close, and just enjoyed conversation. Ryan was 2 years behind me in school. I was a senior, and he was a sophomore, but growing up we had always been close. We always hung out in the same groups, played the same sports, had the same hobbies, etc. Around 9, we were settled comfortably around the fire. I had just texted our mom to let her know we were safe and getting ready for bed, and I remember we were talking about dreading going to our grandparents' house for Thanksgiving and having the same awkward conversations we had each year with family we only saw on holidays when things started to get strange. We were no stranger to sounds in the woods, and these woods were full of animals, from deer to black bears, and even the random wild boar. If you are in the woods enough, you learn to distinguish certain sounds, and what we were hearing I can only chalk up to as odd. What Ryan and I heard was what sounded like someone sneaking around slowly just out of eyesight. With an animal walking on four legs, you hear a tighter group of steps, but what we were hearing sound very distinct to what a human sounds like when walking slowly or trying to move without making much sound. I remember we both pulled out our flashlights and shone it in the direction we felt the sounds were coming from, but that is what was so weird. Whenever we would fix our lights on a spot, we thought the sound were coming from the location of the sound would suddenly change. It was as if there were multiple people walking around us. That's when the whistling started. At first I thought it was the wind, and I remember thinking maybe the wind is just throwing leaves around, and what we are hearing is nothing but the wilderness around us. Ryan looked at me and asked if I was hearing that. I didn't answer, and was trying to focus hard on each individual sound. 2 consecutive notes with roughly a 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. Over and over again. Ryan kept asking if I heard that, and I put my finger to my lips trying to keep him from talking. The fear I felt was incredible. My jaw was tight, my fist clenched, knowing I wasn't ready for whatever was out there if it was anything at all. The whistling continued for what felt like forever, but thinking it through was maybe 5 minutes when Ryan finally yelled out into the darkness. "Hey! Quiet!" The whistling stopped. The crunching of the wood stopped. Nothing. I was pissed. I looked at Ryan with a, "What the hell?" look, and he shrugged his shoulders. "I had to do something," he said. I just shook my head. We sat there in silence for a few minutes when the woods erupted with noise. Something or someone was running in a circle around our campsite. The whistling came back. 2 consecutive notes with the same 3 to 4 second gap, and then 2 more consecutive notes. How could someone whistle this loudly without cracking while also running? I was done. I stood up, shining my flashlight in all directions, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was screwing with us. Nothing. It felt close enough to touch, but we never saw a thing. That's when the movement stopped, but the whistling was still constant. It was so loud. Inhumanly loud. I looked at Ryan and told him to call the police. Now this is the part one will never forget. The part one never liked to talk about. While Ryan was on the phone with the dispatcher and telling them our location and what was going on, I stepped around the fire towards my tent. Inside my bag I had a 6-inch fixed blade that I always carried and thought I would feel a bit more comfortable with it in my hand more than just my flashlight. Yes, I went to unzip my tent. Trying to keep my eyes toward the woods, I heard some movement directly in front of me. I swept my light up in front of me, and for maybe 2 seconds I saw it. Whatever this person or thing was, it was about 5 feet up in a tree. Everything about it was long. Its arms, legs, neck, fingers, everything. And it was fast. As soon as the light hit it, launched backwards off of the tree. I heard it land, but it either jumped an impossible distance or landed in a thicket, because I heard it but never saw. I don't think I have ever yelled so loud. I ran back to where Ryan was and sat down. He kept asking me what I saw, but I couldn't answer. I just kept thinking about what I saw. Maybe 10 minutes later, we saw a couple of flashlight beams coming through the woods, and about 3 guys came into view, asking if everything was okay. I settled a bit and started asking them if they had seen or heard anything. All they said was they heard a lot of movement and then heard my scream, and that's when they headed in our direction. I tried to explain what had happened without sounding crazy, but it didn't seem to work. One of the guys walked around a bit and came back and said he didn't see anything. Ryan told them that we called the police, and roughly 30 minutes later, a park ranger showed up. Ryan and I tried explaining everything to him, but he just chalked it up to either a curious animal or some campers trying to mess with us. Either way, Ryan and I decided we weren't staying the night. We packed our stuff up and walked out of the woods with the ranger. He took our statement and we got in our car and drove home. Ryan and I don't talk about what happened that night, but neither of us have been back to Jack's River Trail and will probably never go back. Fifth story. The house on Haunted Street. The name on the sign was Haunted Street. I had always thought that was strange, but I wrote it off as a joke some developer had played back when the homes were first built. I'd known about the place all my life because that's the road my grandmother lived on, but we'd never spent the night, so I never really got a chance to put the name to the test. It was spring break and I was out of school for a week, so my parents decided that would be a great time to visit. I was in the 9th grade at the time and didn't have much else going on, so I was fine with it. It'd be nice to see old Grandma Gable again. Last time she saw me I was half my height and age. She lived alone in that old house. I felt kinda sorry for her, but she had a bridge club she went to and kept herself busy with charity work. She was getting really old and we were starting to worry about her. My folks even toyed with the idea of moving in with her, so if there was an emergency, we'd be there to call for an ambulance. We arrived on a Monday night in a rainstorm. The road was bumpy and in disrepair, so my mom kept hitting potholes, causing the car to bounce up and down. Water blurred the view out the windows while blue flashes from the sky sent blinding shockwaves through the car. The thunder was deep and rolling. The mood in the car was odd and apprehensive as we rounded the corner and the headlights illuminated the street sign. Haunted Street. It felt like we were starting a cheesy B horror flick. Only myself, my mom, and Dad were the main characters. The house came into view through the downpour, its dim glow fading in through the storm. It was an old Victorian thing with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. The attic was small and rose above the roof like a little tower on top. It had a large round window with lots of ornate designs. The windows on the lower floors were all lit a dim red from fabric curtains. Its appearance was reminiscent of the Bates house in Psycho. The developers must have had a strange sense of humor when they built this neighborhood. We got out and ran through the rain to her front door. She had a small foyer, so we just walked in as my mom called out for her. She came around and gave us all hugs and the usual. She sat us down in the living room and got us all dry towels and hot tea she had made. The interior had high ceilings and lots of bare wood. There were rugs on the floors and a creaky stairwell at the back of the living room. All the furniture was antique and ornate, like everything from the old world. There was a small graveyard out back where Grandma had buried all of her various pets over the years. She even had little headstones made for them with their names on them. It was sweet and sad at the same time. Gable was a strange old woman who had lived a mysterious and bizarre life for her time. She had traveled with a carnival as a fortune teller, managed a wax museum in Salem, and finally settled down with my grandfather, who had been a semi-famous spiritualist in the 1940s. Grandma Gable loved to get out her scrapbook and go through her photos with us and tell us all about the old days. It bored my father, but I enjoyed looking at the faded and aged black and white photos of people I didn't know, most of whom had long since passed. We moved to the dining room table, where she was going to give us the standard family history lesson. The display of old photographs spread across the table told the story of her travels with images of unusual and strange people. The bearded lady, a carnival barker, a lion tamer, and others sat contrasted by images of wax figures of the Queen and other notable historical figures. There were photos of Gable with her crystal ball and of Grandpa holding a seance. The figures in the pictures were all fascinating characters, but there was something off and disquieting about them that I couldn't put my finger on. As I sipped my Earl Grey tea, she told us we'd be having guests for the week. She was excited for me to meet some of her old friends. My mother looked confused and asked her who was coming, but Gable just smiled and told her it'll be a nice surprise. After the storm let up, We got our luggage out of the car and put them into the rooms we'd be sleeping in. My parents were going to take the room down the hall from Grandma on the ground floor, and I was given my pick of anywhere else in the house. For some reason, I thought the third floor would be fun, up away from the others with a view out the window that looked over the front yard and street below. The wooden stairs creaked and groaned as I ascended. I wondered how long it had been since the wood had endured the weight of a human body. At Gable's age, it was unlikely she'd ventured up them in some time. The second floor was dark and quiet. I peered down the hallway at the row of doors. A sense of some presence there arose within me, followed by a chill and mild fear. I wanted to go check to make sure the rooms were empty, but my apprehension held me back in an uncomfortable way, so I continued up to the third floor where I decided to spend the night. I chose a room to the front left side of the house, if you were looking at it from the street. There was a bathroom that adjoined the rear left side room and 2 more rooms across the hall which also shared a bathroom. At the back of the hallway was an iron spiral staircase that led to the attic. Both floors had deep red plush carpeting and framed black and white photos of people hanging on the walls. Some of them I recognized from the photos Gable had shown us. The hallway was lit by a small chandelier, and the bedroom used a few Tiffany-style lamps. The wood beneath the carpet creaked and bowed as I walked across it, making me wonder if choosing the third floor on such an old house had been a mistake. I tested the bed, and it seemed solid and secure on the floor. I decided I probably wouldn't fall through if I sat on it, took the risk, and found to my relief that it was safe. It was late, and so I climbed under the covers and drifted off to sleep. I woke sometime in the night to the sound of raindrops bluntly tapping on the window glass. I could reach the curtains without getting up, and so I pulled them back and watched the watery spectacle backlit from the streetlight below. The light rain was calming with its muffled tones and distant thunder. I was cozy under the covers and glad to be out of the wet, chilly night air. I glanced towards the back wall in the room and watched the shadow of the water on the window draining downward, interrupted by light splashes of new raindrop strikes against the glass. It painted the wall with a dreary display that seemed like a psychedelic movie without the vivid colors, as if watched on an old black and white TV. There, in this display of light and shadow, the moving fluid lines made images when combined with the ornate pattern of the wallpaper. I could see faces there, long and twisted, morphing, laughing maniacally, staring right at me from the wall as if the shadows somehow were aware of my presence. I knew it was mere illusion, a coincidence of patterns on the wall and moving shadows of the rain on the window. But it was unnerving just the same. The faces moved as the water flowed, causing a menacing animation. But why only faces? Shouldn't the shadows take on a variety of formations? Then I saw it. One of these faces looked like a man I'd seen in Grandma Gable's photo collection. He had a thin mustache and deep-set eyes with short, slicked back, dark hair, parted to one side. He seemed to display an evil grin when I recognized him, as if he were reading my mind. Just out of a perverse curiosity, I thought to myself that if he really were reading my mind somehow, I asked him to nod. Just then some wind kicked up and several gusts blew the running water on the window up and down, causing the shadow to nod and laugh. This freaked me out so much I sat up in bed, turned on the light, and closed the curtain. For a few minutes I just sat there still. I breathed deep and listened. The house was quiet. I looked around the room at everything. I was alone. Nothing seemed odd about the room at all. I convinced myself that it had just been a strange coincidence. It had to have been. I went back to sleep. This time I left the light on. The next morning my mom rapped on the door. I called out, and she said breakfast would be ready in a few minutes. I sat up and opened the curtain. The sun wasn't fully up yet, and the sky was a deep medium blue. There were a few birds chirping in the distance somewhere. Things seemed normal. I walked over to the bathroom door and opened it, hoping the plumbing was in adequate condition for a shower. I stopped, dumbfounded. There was a man in trousers and a sleeveless t-shirt, leaned over gazing at himself in the mirror whilst shaving his face. He did not turn to look at me as if he hadn't noticed the door opening. I thought it must have been one of Gable's friends she had said were coming over. The fact that he was shaving implied he had spent the night, or been driving all night. I decided not to startle him lest he cut himself in the moment, so I gently closed the door. I wasn't sure if there might be other guests in the other rooms, so I just made myself as presentable as I could and headed down for breakfast instead of taking the risk of disturbing them to use one of the other showers. Halfway through breakfast, the man still hadn't come down. I asked Gable about him, but she said no other guests had arrived yet. The four of us were the only ones in the house, she said. I thought she was trying to be spooky and play a little joke, so I let it go. After eating, I went back upstairs to check. I knocked on the door to the bathroom and called out to the man. There was no answer, so I opened the door. The room was dark and empty. I turned on the light. The sink and bathtub were bone dry. The whole room was as if no one had been in there for quite a while. I had seen moisture on the mirror earlier, but there was no sign of it at all. In fact, the mirror was dusty. The door that led into the other bedroom was slightly ajar. There didn't seem to be any light on in there. I knocked on it and again called out to the man in case I was just losing it. I said out loud that I was opening the door, then slowly pulled the door open, revealing a dark and empty room. The bed was made. There were no bags or luggage to be seen. No sign of the man at all. I checked the other two rooms on the third floor as well, and they were both empty. I wasn't ready to believe in the disappearing man just yet, but I was creeped out enough to use the shower on the ground floor where my family was nearby. I decided to check the rest of the house out after lunch. I asked Gable if any of her expected guests had shown up while I was in the shower. I didn't want to walk in on anyone who may have occupied a room during that time, however brief. She said they hadn't. I quickly checked all the rooms on the ground floor. My parents' room had my father in it. My mom was coming out of the ground floor bathroom as I passed. I glanced inside Gable's room. No one was in there. I searched the whole floor, including the kitchen. I even checked all the closets. No one else was on the ground floor other than my parents and my grandma. The second floor was still dark and foreboding. I slowly walked along the hallway there, eyeing each picture on the wall as I passed. At the far end of the hallway were 4 empty frames up on the wall, 2 on each side of the hallway. The bedrooms were laid out the same way as on the third floor, with 2 sets of rooms on either side of the hallway connected by a shared bathroom. None of them had anyone inside. I was sure the man must be hiding in the attic. He must have been a squatter, living there without Grandma Gable's knowledge or permission. She never went upstairs anymore, I thought. She couldn't climb the stairs at her age. That has to be it. He's a squatter. I ascended the spiral staircase cautiously and slowly entered the attic. The only light up there was coming from the round window. It dimly lit the room but failed to illuminate the dark edges on either side. And in those spaces was clutter, boxes and papers. I could see the edges in dim black and shades of gray. There was enough room for a body to be lying in the dark there. I scanned the blackness with eyes wide open and straining to see. I tried the overhead light, but it did not turn on. I took a step closer and noticed a box full of crumpled paper. In the gloomy light, I thought I could make out something there. I couldn't tell if it was more clutter in the box or some fingers sticking up. Whatever they were solidly still. I took another step towards it to make sure. Just more clutter, I thought. Then it lifted up and rotated over as if it were a hand connected to an arm somewhere in the black. My heart felt a punch and I flailed backwards, reeling in terror. I stumbled down the stair, calling out for my father. Within 10 minutes, we were both back up there with a flashlight and a baseball bat. No one was there. I found the box, and all it had inside it was some packing paper and party streamers. My father told me I was freaking myself out and that I should take a bedroom on the ground floor with the rest of the family. He researched the entire house with me to set my mind at ease. When we were both satisfied that no one was there, I packed my belongings and moved into the room closest to the stairwell on the ground floor, just up the halfway from my parents and Gable. I felt both confused and embarrassed. I knew I'd seen these things. At dinner, my grandma told me she had a surprise for me. She wasn't going to tell me, but in light of my needing a bit of cheering up, she said, she decided to break the news early. She'd left me the house in her will. I'd almost thought it was a joke. After we ate, I went out back to sneak in a cigarette in Gable's pet cemetery. The air was cool as the sun glowed through the cloud cover on the horizon. The little gravestones looked lonely, and for a moment I wished I'd spent more time with Grandma over the years, so I'd have some fond memories of the little creatures. One stone had a depiction on it of the doggy that I'd presumed was buried there. Little white thing with black spots and one big black spot around his right eye. Just then I heard a scratching on the rear door of the house. I looked up, and there was that very dog. He tilted his head to one side as he looked at me. Then he turned around and seemed to disappear into a crack in the wood. It was as if he stepped into it. The crack was no wider than a few centimeters, yet the dog slipped into it with ease. At this point, I was convinced I was having full-blown hallucinations. I went back inside to talk to my father about it, but Gable said they'd gone to bed early. That sounded like a good idea to me, so I told her I wasn't feeling well and I was going to do the same. I woke again in the middle of the night to the sound of someone coming down the stairs, pounding their feet on each step. I thought maybe Grandma was falling or something, so I quickly went out to the foot of the stairwell where I saw nothing. No one else got up. I found it hard to believe they hadn't heard it. I stood there for a minute and listened, but the sound did not return. I stared up the stairwell and found myself afraid to climb it. I knew I should check to see if Grandma had gone up there and needed help, but I was reluctant to do it. Eventually, I forced myself to go up after retrieving the flashlight my father had used earlier. It shone a circle of light on the steps as I ascended. On the second floor, I had the impulse to look at the pictures again. When I got to the empty frames at the end of the hall, I found to my horror that two of them now had pictures in them. One was a black and white picture of my father, and the other was of my mother. Things were getting too weird for me. I went back to bed determined to tell my parents that I wanted to go home the next day. Morning came, and at breakfast Gable sat at the table alone. She said my parents were sleeping in. Going to bed early was out of character for them, but sleeping in was just plain a lie. I didn't know what was going on, but I was going to find out. I ran to their room and opened the door. They were not there. I ran back to scold Grandma and demand answers, but she was no longer at the kitchen table. I scoured the house searching, but all three of them were gone. However, on the second floor, another blank frame now had a photo in it. Just like the others, it was a black and white picture which looked like it had been taken in the years prior to World War II. It was a picture of Gable. I looked at the last empty frame on the wall, and I knew it was meant for me. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.